So off-piste and ski touring can be very, very safe if we apply the basics, if we apply the basic risk and accident reduction measures. The thing is that it can be very, very dangerous if we don't apply the basic risk reduction and accident reduction measures. So it can be very much like it looked like in these last few images. If we're applying risk reduction measures, then it can look like this here if we're not applying the accident reduction, risk reduction measures. This is what the consequences
We'll go.
Like. So this is what we're trying to avoid, and what we're trying to maximize is the fun on the mountains, as much fun as possible. And the way we're going to do that is look at and focus on, for the core of the talk, a framework of the key basic risk reduction, accident reduction measures. And the way I've got this set up is there's 3 different titles. Then under each 3 different titles, decision making, risk reduction, and crisis management, there's 3 key points which make up the basis of the accident reduction framework here, and accident reduction for us. And one of the main things I wanted to bring across here is that this is what I do, and I have done for decades. So I'm not trying to communicate to you something that you should do, and I sort of do something else because I have this sort of mystical knowledge that I've developed over the decades. No, we're all on the same level in terms of making things safe on the mountain for ourselves. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on each one of these points.
And to help people remember each of these points, remember the framework and apply it, everybody at the talks gets a pocket guide, an aid memoir, memory aid pocket guide that includes a quick reference page. And also, to help further apply, there's a version that of the framework that has numeric values next to each one of these points, so you can add them up and then place them on a scale that helps to situate yourself in terms of what the level of danger is. And ultimately, the whole goal is just help us to apply the framework and remember these points. So they're A7 size. They're given out at the talks, and also you can buy them via the website, henrysavalanchetalk.com.
So the goal here is really to help you have as much fun out on the mountains, get the most out of the time on the mountains, and reduce the chance of an accident, which means we have the most fun. And this is with or without a professional. And from my side, what's really motivated me over the last decades to do these presentations and training as well on the mountain as well as off the mountain is this sense of freedom. I found out, or I felt many years ago when I had a very close call with an avalanche, that the more I learned about safety, the more I felt free to push the limits, and because I wasn't leaving it down to some sort of random chance and that I didn't know about. I wasn't leaving my safety down to some sort of random thing that I wasn't really aware of. So that's where we came up with this motto: safety is freedom. And that's one of the main points or part of our culture at Henry's Avalanche Talk, is this spirit, of safety. Safety is freedom. That's really our vision, if you like to call it that. That safety can be a liberating thing rather than this constraining thing that we often come across in our everyday lives, like health and safety and things. So safety is freedom is the goal is the vision, and the goal is to help you have as much fun out on the mountain as a result. And so I've divided things up above and beyond the core points that we're going to look at. I've divided things up into two sections. We're going to look at the problem that we seek to solve, and then look at the solution, which is applying a framework and human factors and teamwork. So to start with, we'll look at the problem. The problem, is it safe? That's one of the main things the main thing we want to solve is it safe to go out there today? Is it safe to go over onto that slope? And the first thing we look at in terms of is it safe is the idea of knowing where the secured areas end and the unsecured areas begin. Because once you go into the unsecured areas, you need to take responsibility for your own safety and that of your group. And it may seem obvious to some of you, but some of you it's not so obvious that in Europe, especially, the secured areas end right at the end of the groomed runs. Like right along those poles there, the secured areas end, and the unsecured areas begin right like 1 millimeter over onto the other side of those poles where it's not groomed in this photo. Different areas and different resorts have different rules about where the secured areas end and the unsecured areas begin, and that's really important to know from the very beginning, so that you know where you need to take responsibility for your own safety and that of your group. And the next point of the problem we're up against is that the victim triggers the avalanche. The victim triggers the avalanche in 90 to 95% of the time we're finding, according to recent research, the victim or someone in the group. And 90 to 95% of the time, it's a slab avalanche that's involved. A slab avalanche is a cohesive layer of snow that slides on a weaker layer of snow underneath it. And even though it's a cohesive layer of snow, it doesn't need to be all that hard. Like right here, it's a slab releasing, and it's still powder snow. These types of things, however ominous they look, they're called glide cracks, or brown frowns in North America, we call them. In France, they call them whales' mouths or whales' snouts. These do not pose a danger to us as long as we're not sort of hanging out and picnicking underneath them. There's not that I don't know of any person who has been really seriously injured or killed by these things releasing. Although they do release at times, and it's completely and totally unpredictable. But if you pass underneath, you spend 1 minute, 30 seconds most, they do not pose a problem to us. The next thing is the wet snow avalanches. They do pose a danger, but the thing about the wet snow avalanches is there is only a tiny percentage of accidents that involve natural wet snow avalanches. So while they pose a danger to us, there's very few accidents that involve wet snow avalanches, and this is because the danger is very predictable. And the danger is predictable, so people tend to know to avoid them. I'm not saying that what's predictable is when and where they're going to go, but the danger is predictable. And in fact, a good part of the accidents with wet snow avalanches happen on closed runs and closed roads. And just also regarding the wet snow avalanche thing is I often get after I go through that summary that I just did, someone will ask me, well, then, so we don't need to worry about wet snow avalanches. And I hope I didn't give that impression. The thing is, you just need to follow your common sense when it comes to wet snow avalanches. For example, avoiding the steep slopes after that have been warmed up by the sun, or just by temperatures, especially after a snowstorm. So back to the real culprit and what I was saying, since we're focused on accident reduction, we're going to focus on where 90 to 95% of all accidents involve these dry slab avalanches that actually happen in December, January, and February, and on the northish side of the mountain, believe it or not. A lot of people are not aware of that. That just about, well, the very, very vast majority of accidents happen in December, January, and February, and on the north-ish side of the mountain. And this is where what it tends to look like a dry, cold slab avalanche. It has a fracture line at the top where the cohesive layer of snow, relatively cohesive layer of snow, slid on the weaker layer of snow underneath it. Now, if you notice in the middle of that avalanche is a little dot, and that's where the person who triggered that avalanche is being taken for a ride, as we call it. And he's doing, or she, or most likely a he, because it's mostly men who set off avalanches. But you also may have noticed that he set this avalanche off on top of 2 other people, which is an impolite thing to do indeed. And it's something that's, well, not, first of all, you won't make friends that way. And it's a more and more common kind of a scenario with the increased popularity of off-piste and ski touring over the last couple decades. And this here isn't just a video that shows you what it looks like when someone's skiing a powder slope and triggers a cold, dry slab avalanches, and it fractures above and around them and then takes them for a ride. You're pretty much helpless when you're caught up in it. And this is one of the reasons why that these avalanches are so dangerous. And that person lived through it, but and was not buried. But if you are buried, you're in sort of darkness and you can't move. You can't move, and according to statistics, your best chances of survival are being taken out or getting out within 15 minutes or less. And you're at this point almost solely, completely dependent on your mates who are up on top of the snow, because you cannot move underneath the snow, even if you're only a few centimeters underneath the snow. And in the next video right here, a young woman named Rihanna describes how it was like, what it was like to be underneath the snow and how she could not move. So here's Rihanna, and we'll pick up in 2 minutes after this video.
Rihanna survived an avalanche. She was under the snow for about 15 minutes, about 2 feet of snow, so it's about 60 centimeters of snow. And none of you had transceivers or shovel or pro pole, huh?
Nothing.
There was 6 of you?
6 of us.
Can you tell us what it was like to be underneath the snow?
It's absolutely horrendous. I don't recommend it. It was 6 of us off skiing and snowboarding, me and one other skier. And I got trapped in an avalanche, taken about 100, 150 meters down the slope. It was buried about 2 feet, and I had no equipment on me. They had no equipment on them. And at first they thought I'd skied off, and I was frozen under the snow in this position, and you can't move. It's like concrete. It's, as someone said, up to 900 kilos on top of you weight, and you just cannot budge it. And I was frozen there, and they were ringing my phone, and I couldn't answer it, and I was screaming, and they couldn't hear me. And I was just there, and after about 5 minutes, I lost consciousness. I had grade 1 hypothermia as well, it later turned out. And basically, by randomly spreading out, they just were poking in the snow with their hands, their snowboards, their skis, and someone of my friends randomly found the back of my leg as a neon pink salopette, and they dug me out. And I wasn't breathing, and they didn't find a pulse, and one of them started giving me CPR, and it worked, and then I was flown by helicopter to hospital, so not fun.
So what kinds of advice would you give to people in terms of equipment and things like that, and other advice?
Have equipment. It's just so not worth your life. The airbag is so important, but also to be carrying a transceiver. Like, I was so unbelievably lucky, but if I'd had a transceiver on, my friends would have found me within about 5 minutes, and it wouldn't have actually been that I sort of was reincarnated. It would have just been a horrible experience, not death.
And the shovel and probe pull.
Shovel and probe as well. I mean, again, they were digging me out with hands and snowboards and ski poles, and they were probing for me with ski poles and snowboards, and it's not really the ideal stuff. So have an av pack with like a shovel, a probe, a transceiver, and have an airbag as well. It's so worth it.
All right, thanks very much.
No worries.
So, whoops. So with that, in summary, the first part of the problem, know where the secured areas end and the unsecured areas begin. 9 times out of 10, it's the victim that triggers the avalanche. And it's a cold, dry slab avalanche that's involved. And in fact, according to recent research, it's more than that, closer to 95%. And then 15 minutes to live if you're buried is really your best chances of survival is getting out from underneath the snow in 15 minutes or less. So that's the really part of the concrete part of the problem. The more abstract and less concrete problem is the human problem, the human factors that are involved in just about every accident. Nothing happens and should have known better. One of the funny things about avalanches is that even when it's really unstable and it's really quote unquote dangerous, most of the time nothing happens. Most of the time nothing happens. And that not only lures us into a false sense of security or we get complacent, we also develop really bad habits. And the bad habits are validated because we have a great run. Me in a professional situation, I've got people who are paying me to find good snow and they're having a great time. And what that leads to is not only, as I mentioned, complacency, which is dangerous, but just bad habits that build up and dangerous habits. And just to give you an idea of what kinds of bad habits develop, one of them is either consciously or unconsciously taking tracks on a slope as something that is an indication that the slope is safe. And obviously, as you can see from this photo, tracks are not a good indication of whether the slopes are safe or not. So, and indeed, tracks are present on the slope or nearby in 2/3 of avalanche accidents, according to research on a specialist on human factors. And this person's name is Ian McCammon, who's not the only expert on human factors in avalanches, but he's the first person within the avalanche safety world to come up with a very, very clear and credible scientific academic study on accidents. And he found that in about 75–80% of cases, there was irrational decision-making on the part of the victims. And he borrowed a lot of the techniques of behavioral psychology and behavioral sciences from other areas like aviation, where 75% of accidents are human factors, from surgery, military, and a whole bunch of other areas that at the end I'm going to go over briefly as well. But what he found was that something that we as professionals knew for a long time was that after the accident, the sense was that, gosh, they should have known better. And Ian showed that that they did know better. But they just weren't applying their experience and their knowledge, their education and training at the time. And as I didn't, when I was caught on video triggering this massive avalanche, and I was known before as the avalanche educator because I've been doing talks like this all throughout the northern French Alps, and after that I was known as the avalanche maker, which is a dubious and embarrassing kind of a label to have on my forehead, especially as someone who claims to be an avalanche and accident reduction coach and educator. But that's what happened. And you can see there's lots of tracks in there. I imagine, if I'm completely honest, unconsciously, I was probably attracted and was able to, attracted, or I felt a false sense of security as a result. And to add insult to injury, this video made it onto National Geographic. So this was a very embarrassing experience, but it helped for me to have a humbling near miss, which is an important piece for those of us who are involved professionally in this domain. But for now to summarize the problem, what we looked at was the secured and unsecured areas. Know where the secured areas end and the unsecured areas begin. 9 times out of 10, or 95% of the time, 95 times out of 100, it's the victim that triggers the avalanche, and the cold, dry slab avalanche that's involved, and best chances to survive after 15 minutes, which means you're counting on your mates, and also added that to that, and I put these last 2 points in black bullet points because, in my opinion, they're the most deadly. Nothing happens most of the time, so we feel complacent, generally unconsciously complacent, develop bad habits, again unconsciously, and bad and dangerous habits, and then when something happens, the sense is that they should have known better, and they should have known better. They did know better. It's just that they weren't applying their experience and knowledge at the time. So how do we solve this problem? So how do we solve this problem? Well, it's been shown that, and again, not only within the avalanche world, but in other areas, whether it's aviation or surgery or military, where errors and accidents have high consequences, applying a framework, often it's checklists, then having a basic knowledge of human factors and also teamwork. So with all that, we're going to come back to the core part of the talk, and look at the basic points, accident reduction points, and also just get a sense of how I got to the point of this framework. And that was not only because of our expert Ian McCammon, who made the suggestion or found that this was the best way to reduce the chance of accidents, having easily applied decision-making tools. And they didn't have to be perfect to save lives. And in fact, they shouldn't be perfect, because if they're perfect, they're too detailed, and we don't apply them in these types of risk contexts, like avalanche terrain. And to give you an example, these tools, they're not screwdrivers or saws or things like that. They are like cues that help us not to make simple errors. And if you take me as a Yank who lives in France, and I come over to the UK, as I do quite a bit, I come into a familiar surrounding like a road, and my instant reaction is a flawed reaction. That's to look left, and that can be very dangerous indeed. And thanks to many of the towns and cities throughout the UK, they help to save people's lives like myself by not making silly errors. And you may be thinking, well, silly errors are made by silly and not very intelligent people. But I'll just draw your attention briefly to an individual, Atul Gawande, who wrote the checklist. Not only wrote the checklist manifesto, but he also is the author of the Surgical Safety Checklist, the World Health Organization Surgical Safety Checklist. That, just a brief summary of that. It's a checklist that all surgical teams have to use in the UK, as well as America, and throughout most of the developed world, and also the developing world, before the patient goes into the operating room. And it's a one-pager, and the first couple questions on the checklist is, do you have the identity, the correct identity of the patient? Really silly things like, do you know which operation you're supposed to be doing on this person? Because it's been found a shocking amount of times that the right operation is often done on the wrong person, or a surgical team will get the right person, the correct person, but do the wrong operation on them. And so it's not just foolish, silly people who make mistakes. It's even intelligent people who make mistakes that have big consequences. Apparently, we make 30 errors a day, all of us. And the trick here is just to reduce. What we need to do is reduce the consequences of making errors in high consequence kinds of contexts like avalanche terrain. And so that's a big part of how I got this checklist framework together. Also, these key points, accident reduction, basic accident reduction points, are things that the victims did not apply when you look at just most accidents that I've looked at throughout the decades. Most of the victims not only did not apply one of these things, but it was several of these points. And as Ian McCammon pointed out in his study, and has pointed out in many other studies too, because I said he's not the only professional on human factors in avalanche accidents, but it's consistently pointed out that the people who got into the accidents had at least some sort of basic knowledge of avalanche safety, but they weren't applying it at the time, despite some generally clear signs of danger, or as Ian McCammon put it, obvious clues, and not just one or two, usually 3 or 4. So where you go and decision making is really about, are we going to go even into this into avalanche terrain? Are we going to go into avalanche terrain in the first place? And avalanche terrain is very simply defined as areas where that have 30-degree slope angles, above, around, below. And 30 degrees doesn't sound like it's all that steep, but it's actually the very steepest part of a red run to black run steepness in the European sort of scale. And that really means that, in very general terms, avalanches release on steep slopes. They release on steep slopes, but they can be triggered from lower angle slopes below and beside, and also from above. So avalanche terrain is really defined as areas that have 30-degree slope angle slopes, of course with snow on them, above, beside you, or below you. And this is kind of good news, because that means that you can avoid these areas if you pay attention. But here's a way of measuring slope angles to take a look at.
We found that the easiest way to get a reference point on a slope of 30 degrees is to make a triangle, an equilateral triangle like this right here in this image. So in order to do this, the first thing you do is make a trace in the snow with one pole, like you see in the foreground. And then you take the tip of one pole and put it at the top of the trace, and the tip of the other pole and put it at the bottom of the trace. And if the downhill pole is leaning towards the slope, like right here, it's less than 30 degrees. Also in this image right here, it's a little bit less than 30 degrees. And note that this is a snowboarder. So snowboarders, you can take poles with you too. It helps to push along the flats. If the pole is straight up and down like right here, then you're at 30 degrees. And if it's leaning over the slope like right here, it's more than 30 degrees. So this is a really good way of measuring slopes and getting a pretty close idea of what that 30-degree reference point is. And remember that you can have a lot of fun on slopes below 30 degrees. It's pretty steep, part of a red run to black run steepness. And if you're skiing in an area where there's no slopes of 30 degrees above you that you're on or below you, you can have an enormous amount of fun in a no-risk area, risk avoidance area. So thanks very much for your attention. Have fun and be safe.
So it's a really good idea to get a sense, an intuitive sense of the steepnesses or the slope steepness just by looking at it. And so that's why it's a good idea to practice those slope measurement techniques. And there's different gadgets and things. SlopeAngel.com sells these little gadgets you can put onto your pole. There's an app called Theodolite where you can aim your phone or tablet at a slope and get a slope angle reading. There's different apps that you can get, and you can go into more detail and get very, very precise about the slope angle. But that 30-degree one is really the easiest one for me, especially when it's cold out. I'm a bit clumsy anyway, so it's difficult for me using apps, and I don't want to drop my phone either. Another great way of measuring slope angles beforehand is getting these sort of these maps from companies like Fat Map, or the ones in France. It's Iphigénie. They're basically ordnance survey maps that have a layover that gives slope angles by color, and you can plan out a tour that way, and also get a sense beforehand of what the slope angles are, and you can sort of wiggle your way through the areas and minimize your exposure to avalanche terrain. So that's the slope steepnesses. And then what we're going to look at now is the second point, is the avalanche rating and bulletin. That I think for this talk, the best way to look at it and summarize is that the higher you go up in the ratings, the more avalanches there are, the easier they are to trigger, and the bigger they are. And you'll notice that I squeezed the number 5 up at the top, and that's because in recent years the international avalanche safety community has really tried to get us to look at the avalanche scale as just 4 different levels, because after looking at accidents and involving the human factor, because you can never get away from that, the experts in accidents throughout the world have noticed that people generally have been looking at a danger rating of 3 as sort of average and okay, because it's in the middle of 5. The problem with that is that it's considerable, is getting considerable. It's getting quite high, and most avalanche deaths happen on the avalanche 3 rating. And so I encourage you to look at the avalanche scale now as a 4 levels, with 5 as being just a very exceptional thing that's introduced by the authorities when the danger is off the charts and very, very, very high. And I encourage you also to know the definitions. You can get them off of henrysavalanchetalk.com under HAT advice. And some of you have got these the card here where I have the framework on the quick view right here, but you can open it up and there's more information where I have a very short summary of the avalanche danger and some more interesting aids on decision making. Anyone who doesn't have that and is interested, send me an email afterwards. We're just starting to get those out and distribute those. I think it's a good way to present how the danger progresses from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. It's not a linear way. It really goes up what they call exponentially. So it really goes up quite dramatically. And that number 3 is a tricky one, because on the lower end, it's pretty reasonable to go out. Remember, we're in the decision-making phase. It's can be reasonable to go out onto avalanche terrain, whereas on a high part of the three, it's less reasonable and a lot more dangerous. Now, why is it dangerous? Well, one of the differences between the definition between a 3 and a 4, for example, is that a 3 it tends to and towards a 2, it's small parts of the slope and smaller avalanches that are the potential size of the avalanche that you could trigger. Whereas once you get up onto the higher end, it's the entire slope that can potentially come down, and actually it can be triggered from quite a long way away. Remotely triggered, as we say in English, or the French say à distance, which I think is more intuitive, from a distance. So what I'm going to show you here in this next video is a person who triggers an avalanche that is much more characteristic of a 4, because the entire slope comes down, and he triggers it on most likely triggers it on a much lower slope angle. So it's about a 20-degree slope angle. He triggers it, and you'll see it starts to come out off above him, and then the whole entire slope comes down. And when that's the type of potential for the size and the sensitivity to triggers, then there's nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. So there's no risk reduction potential. The recent avalanche activity is the third point in this decision-making phase. Recent avalanche activity is defined as, well, fairly recent, in the last 24 hours or so. And it's a very good clue that there's instability on the mountain. And how can you tell it's recent? Well, if you look at the crown line, we call this the sort of fracture line, it's quite clear and quite vivid and not really dull. It's quite sharp looking. And again, we're talking about slab avalanches. These ones that come down from a point, they're not the ones that are good clues about avalanche instability. In fact, quite a few of the ones that come from points, that's often a sign of actually the snow stabilizing. And here is a good representation of, well, quite a bit of recent avalanche activity, but typical of a sort of a danger rating 3 day. And I also encourage you to look at the bulletins, and the bulletins when you're looking at the avalanche danger ratings can give you ideas about recent avalanche activity. Usually, if there's been recent avalanche activity, especially accidental avalanche activity, it'll be mentioned in the bulletin. It's one page. And they'll say, well, at 2,200 meters on a west-facing slope or an east-facing or whatever facing slope, there was someone who triggered an avalanche, and that it gives you a really good clue as to what the stability is like out on the mountain, and whether or not it's worth going out into avalanche terrain. And I also, in this phase, I'll just emphasize that staying in these no risk areas out of the 30-degree slope angles is the best way to move through this phase. So you're not moving into avalanche terrain, you're using the time to ski on the lower slope angles and observe. Like this person right here is actually on the piste and sees a recent avalanche activity here. And then if you look at the arrow behind, there is even more significant avalanche activity. And also what I characterize as recent avalanche activity is signs of instability, like these cracks that have come out right by the knees of that person who's walking along in the snow. And we'll talk about the whoomph and these shooting cracks that can happen. That's a weak layer collapsing underneath, and often happens when you're in areas that are no risk areas or areas that are don't have slope angles of 30 degrees in above you, beside you, or below you. And actually, if this slope was on a 30-degree or more slope angle, there's a good chance that an avalanche accident would have actually happened, or an avalanche would have been triggered. And I'm just going to really emphasize too this idea of throughout this decision-making phase, you staying in the risk avoidance, danger avoidance areas outside of avalanche terrain, away from the 30-degree steepness slopes. I call this going for the low-hanging fruit. To summarize what we just looked at, where you go and when. So is it safe? It depends on you. Depends on where you go is the first is the first answer to that question. And staying away from avalanche terrain while you're going through this decision-making process, and staying out of the avalanche, the slope angles of 30-degree steepness or more, considering the ratings in the bulletins and those definitions, and then getting out onto the mountain and looking at recent avalanche activity. Remember, the ratings and bulletins is a forecast, and a lot of places they come out the day before, so it's a forecast. Sometimes the forecast is wrong, just like with weather forecasts. Sometimes they forecast rain and it's sunny, and sometimes they forecast sun and it's rainy. So that's why that last bit, the recent avalanche activity, is us confirming what's going on out on the mountain. And it's sometimes you can a good technique is not only to look for yourself, but ask people, the Peace Patrol and other people who are out and about on the mountains, and credible people too, not just people who sort of sound like they know what they're talking about. And so sometimes, it's worth coming to the conclusion, especially if if you see yourself not sure if it's kind of working its way up onto the higher bits of the avalanche danger. It's perfectly reasonable to stay away the entire day, away from avalanche terrain, and because the slopes, 25-degree slope, like that person skiing in powder, is you can have a lot of fun on that. But then there's also perfectly reasonable, especially if you're down in that moderate area, with the danger rating of perhaps moderate, or if you could come to the conclusion, or you're good enough to be able to come to conclusion that at a low level of 3, it's perfectly reasonable, especially if there's no avalanche activity, recent avalanche activity in sight, perfectly reasonable to go up onto steeper slopes. And I will caution that if there's any doubt in your mind, you stay you can go off piste and touring, but in the areas away from avalanche terrain, away from those slope steepnesses that define avalanche terrain. But if you do go up, it's a danger rating of 2, for example, not little or no recent avalanche activity, maybe some new snow. You need to continue to apply the basic accident reduction points in order to keep things safe. And one thing I'm going to emphasize and re-emphasize is that safe, for me, at Henry's Avalanche Talk, the base reference for that is everyday activities. And it's been shown that if you are applying these points, as I said before, it can be really safe. And well, what does that mean? It's as safe as everyday activities like driving a car. That's what our goal is, and that's when I'm referred to as safe. And what I'm striving for is to bring the danger level to a reasonable level, and that's defined as the level of risk or danger that we engage in everyday activities, like driving, for example. And driving is not it's not the safest thing in the world, but we do accept it in our everyday lives. So if we made a decision to go into avalanche terrain and we want to keep it within this definition of safe everyday activities, even if there's no or very little avalanche activity or no avalanche activity, danger rating of 2, you still need to apply these key points in order to keep it reasonably safe, like these everyday activities. So terrain traps, what are they? It's anything that will make a small, medium to small avalanche even really deadly, or any size avalanche more deadly because of the consequences. Well, here in So terrain traps, what are they? It's anything that will make a small, medium to small avalanche even really deadly, or any size avalanche more deadly because of the consequences. Well, here, and if you look at the lower right-hand side of the screen, there's like a hole there that made the snow build up and build up and build up. And up on the upper left-hand side of the screen, a person went in there and triggered that avalanche and went for about 300 meters and was buried under about 3 meters of snow. Generally, after 2 meters, if you're under 2 meters of snow, your chances of survival are very, very slim, just because of the amount of time it takes to get someone out. But this person was very lucky. It was someone on the piste patrol in a cabin who saw the person and got in there and was able to dig them out with about 10 or 15 piste patrol people. Now, you also maybe have noticed by now that in the upper left-hand corner, there's recent avalanche activity. That slab was already there before this accident took place. So you had some clear signs of danger, and perhaps, as I said before, combined with a false sense of security or a bit of complacency, the tracks there, which would have consciously or unconsciously made us feel a bit more, or that made that person feel more comfortable. This is a classic situation where someone, a very serious and tragic accident can happen. And if I look through all of the avalanche accidents scenarios, this is just typical kind of a situation. Several of those points not applied in the framework. So to move on with this is what a terrain trap can look like: a steep slope that ends up in a small lake. Yep, a terrain trap is not only holes, it's lakes, it's trees, cliffs as well. And that's why I put that in the icon there, a little person falling off a cliff. And they can take place right next to the piste as well. Just because the piste or the runs are there and there's people around doesn't mean that the avalanches aren't going to abide by the laws of nature that they abide by, kilometers and kilometers away from the pistes. Quite a high level, I'd say a significant minority of accidents happen right near the piste, like this right here. And all those people are standing on a blue run. And I don't think that the people realized that they were the victims of this avalanche, which was quite tragic. There were 3 people taken and 1 person was killed, where those people in the forefront, the bottom part of the screen, are trying to do the avalanche rescue. I don't think at all that they knew that they were going into avalanche terrain. Steep slope above a terrain trap. This type of scenario, this photo is quite old. It's about 30 years old. And this is what inspired me to not pursue what I had done as a first degree in geology and avalanche forecasting, to not pursue the very technical sides of snow science and avalanche sciences and get into the avalanche awareness side of things, because I'm sure that these people, actually I interviewed some of the survivors, and they said that they didn't have any idea. And if I'm convinced if they did have some idea about just the basics, levels of safety, of avalanche safety, they wouldn't have lost their friend. So in summary, for terrain traps, if there's one thing that you take away from this evening's chat, it's make a conscious effort to stay away from steep slopes above terrain traps, especially when there's fresh snow. On some seasons, it's more than 50% of all accidents are people who are taken, like that person in the video, but they trigger an avalanche on a steep slope above a terrain trap. And so the next point about risk reduction is keeping distances between between the people in your group. And why is this? There's two main reasons for that. First of all, it's weight that triggers avalanches, and simply speaking, and if you have more weight, there's more chance of triggering an avalanche. So you diminish that by keeping people spread out. The other reason you keep distances is to make sure that there's only one person at a time exposed to any potential danger, because that way you don't end up in a scenario where two people are buried underneath the snow. Finding one person underneath the snow and having that pressure, that time pressure on trying to get your mate out alive is bad enough. With one person, 2, 3, 4, 5 people it's really stressful, and there's a much better chance that someone will not survive if there's more than one person buried. Keeping distances, it takes a little bit of patience, but once you develop a system with the people that you're skiing with and everybody's on the same page in terms of safety, you can start to do things like this right here, where you move along together and only expose one person at a time to the danger. Notice we're not above terrain traps here, and this is a day, it was a danger rating of 2. As I mentioned before, very little to no recent avalanche activity. And so what I do on days like that is I start with slopes like this, about 50, 100 meters long, not these huge slopes, and just to work our way in and continue to test the stability of the slope, and get into the mode where we're implementing the risk reduction measures. And also, as we're walking up, it seems I've noticed a lot of accidents in last decade or so, where people trigger avalanches when they're walking up while they're touring, and they were not applying the risk reduction measures of distances for whatever reasons. I think I can understand. I've been guilty of it, getting into sort of a mode of kind of a hypnotic state of just being in a really beautiful surroundings, very quiet, and then you stop thinking, you get complacent. You know, as I was saying, nothing happens most of the time, and these things happen. We're all vulnerable to being distracted and getting complacent. So the last bit in this section, after avoiding terrain traps and keeping distances, is stopping at safe and safer zones. So, and you watch your friends, like that group above, they're going one at a time here. They've made that choice here. You watch your friends until they get a safer zone. Well, what does that mean? Well, a safe zone is completely in a totally safe area, like where these people are. If you saw that little green check or white check on the green circle that I put next to those people up at the top of that ridge there's nothing threatening them at all. And so that's very clear. That's a safe area. This area here is a safe area because there's no slopes threatening them where they are there. Here, this is a bit blurry because it's a video that I may show you afterwards, where you have the red exclamation point there. That's, if we had stopped there, we'd been exposed to that entire slope there. Whereas if we went to the side where those tracks, those were my tracks and a person who came down after me, those fresh ones of the exclamation point, and it's over that check in the green box. That means it's sort of it's a safer place, because it's not as dangerous as being or exposed to the danger as out where that red exclamation point is, but it's not 100% safe. You don't want to hang out there and sort of take your skis off and start putting on the sun cream and things on. It's a gathering point, temporary stopping point at a safer zone or a gathering point. So there's safe, where you're completely not exposed, and safer, and then there's the red exclamation point, a place where it's just a lot more exposed to the danger, and there's no need to stop there. You can stop somewhere where it's less exposed. So I'll give you a quick little overview of what this looks like if we stand back and you look at the upper right-hand side of the screen. There's a group of 6 people in a safe place, and they are aware that they're at the lower left-hand side of the screen. There's another safe place, but in between that, there's places that are quite exposed, and there's safer places. So what they do is they spread out. Maybe they've gone all together, and in that place where there's 2 of them together, that might be a gathering point right there, and where the team might have decided, well, maybe 2 or 3 people at a time there is fine, and then you take a quick little rest, and then you move on. And as you've seen, 400 meters between that little steep slope and that flat area, you might be thinking, gosh, that looks like a bit of overkill, but I know that even very experienced people have misjudged the size and the distance of avalanches. So I'm always, when I can, trying to leave as much error, as much margin for error as possible. And when I can. And that gets to finally, just want to reinforce this idea that, you know, the tools we use in decision making and risk management don't need to be perfect to save lives. You don't need to be perfect with all these points. As long as you're trying to apply, then you'll be infinitely more safe than if you're not applying these points. And I'll finish off this section with escape routes are something I always keep in mind. And what that means is I'm thinking every time I'm on a slope, if it released, you know, steep slope, where would I go? And that reminds me, okay, well, maybe we're not keeping distances. Ooh, gosh, I might be over a terrain trap. But most of all, I'm thinking, okay, where's the safer or safe place that I'm headed to if something happens? And it helps me to remember to apply. I've caught myself so many times not applying the points that the previous 3 points in risk reduction. I'm caught myself when I'm thinking of escape route. So this is where this person went straight down into the side. That's the idea. If something is triggered, and it's been shown that if people do react and you do try to get out, head straight down into the side of the moving avalanche, you have a better chance of getting out than if you just sort of sit there and let it take you. Now, this next video is a good demonstration of how to do it, but obviously wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I don't know anybody who is good enough to have been able to out ski that avalanche. And if they were even one split half second too late, they would have been dragged over those cliffs below. So this is not something we try at home, as they say, but it's a good example of an escape route down into the side. So even when we're going through the best decision-making practices and we're applying the key points of risk reduction, these basic risk reduction, there is a chance that that something could happen and someone's buried. So we still really need to take the precautions so that we have the best chance of being able to get our mates out, or have our mates be able to get us out from underneath the snow. It's called a companion. Be ready for a companion search and rescue, and that's what the equipment and training is about here. Even when we're going through the best decision-making practices and we're applying the key points of risk reduction, these basic risk reduction, there is a chance that that something could happen and someone's buried. So we still really need to take the precautions so that we have the best chance of being able to get our mates out, or have our mates be able to get us out from underneath the snow. It's called a companion. Be ready for a companion search and rescue, and that's what the equipment and training is about here. I call it also a self-contained search and rescue, because 15 minutes, the organized rescue isn't going to get in there in time. So the first thing is unstrapping your poles, because when people who survive underneath the snow, of the 70% of people who die are suffocate. So you want to avoid, the best chances of avoiding that are being able to get an air pocket in front of your mouth, or holding onto your backpack and being able, the strap of your backpack, and putting your elbow in front and keeping a little air pocket, because that will gives the carbon dioxide that much more space to evacuate. And of course, if you have your pull straps on, you can't do that. And also they can act as anchors and pull you down underneath the snow. And in North America, the issue with trees is one of the reasons why a lot of people don't wear straps as well, because it gets caught on a tree, you can pull your shoulder out. But the basic equipment is the transceiver that transmits, sends, and receives or searches. Everyone's skiing around on transmit, and if someone's underneath, everyone switches on to search. So there's only one person transmitting or sending, and that way you can get in and find them. I can go in more detail about this too as we have a chat. You also need a probe pole, because even though the transceivers are very, very, very accurate, they won't be able to pinpoint exactly within 10 or 15 centimeters where the victim is. And since time is so important, you need to be able to figure out exactly where the person is, so you're not digging 1 or 2 centimeters to the left or the right of them, or above or below them. And then having a shovel is really important too, because snow, even light snow, is a very heavy thing. And these three things, as research, this diagram expresses the results of research in recent years about how effective and how important not only the transceiver is, but how important having the probe and the shovel. If there's any questions about this, I can come back to it. But basically, if you had training, people who've had training can get someone out from under 1 meter of snow in 11 minutes if they have the transceiver, shovel, and probe, and all the way to the other side, where if you just have the transceiver, can take 1 to 2 hours to get someone out from underneath the snow. And it does take training. It's not rocket science, but there's training that you can do with your mates, or we offer some training as well on henrysavalanchetalk.com. You can check that out. And talking about the training, we move into the human factors. We pull all this together and end this my more sort of lecture side of things. Not only do human factors come into play when there's a crisis situation and it impedes our ability to function, because it's even very experienced people sometimes freeze in these crisis situations. And the way we overcome those types of human factors is through training, so it becomes second nature. I think an hour and a half or 2 hours every season is fine. As I said, it's not rocket science, but just getting out there and practicing a bit is really important, because learning how to use the equipment, the time to learn how to use the equipment is not while your mate's underneath the snow suffocating to death. And you'd probably, if it was you was underneath the snow, you'd hope that your mates had been training too. Now, the other thing about this is that the best crisis management is, of course, prevention. And as you noticed, the core part of this talk is about prevention. And so that's why we come back to the human factors and this framework. And so the emphasis in this talk has been on applying, because most instances where there's been accidents, people were not applying these key points, as I said before. And so the idea is to take these key points and be applying them all the time, and be aware that when nothing happens, it's really, really easy to start getting complacent, and also start coming up with even unconsciously, this idea that maybe if there's tracks there, it's fine. Or I heard a mate said that stop in the afternoons doing off-piste and you'll be fine, only skiing off-piste in the mornings. And also a reminder that it's not just people who are learning, it's also professionals who are up against this. And that's why I put the cover of, in America, we have the American Association of Avalanche Professionals has a publication called the Avalanche Review. And the title of this one it emphasizes a constant problem that we have as professionals, because in this context of high consequence, you can die, or low validity or low feedback, where you're not getting feedback from the environment, it's really difficult to figure out the difference between our skills and just luck. Are we being good, as they say here, or just lucky? And McCammon, as I said, he came up with the first real academic and credible and clear overview of why the accidents happen and the human factors that contribute to most accidents. These are what he came up with, which forms the basis of accident reduction in the avalanche world today. There's other points of view, but generally, even the other points of views don't contradict this explanation for why accidents happened. The familiarity, the commitment, summit fever, being absolutely focused on getting to the top, acceptance, fitting in with the group. And the last two are the ones where we saw that that fit really well with that person who was skiing and triggered the avalanche on the seventh person. Social proof is kind of the herd instinct. Tracks and people you feel safe. This is consciously or unconsciously. And scarcity is our tendency to value things in proportion to the chance we might lose them, and like get there before it's tracked out. And that's probably the most deadly, those two things. Again, we can come back to this, but basically what the idea is that this is not the solution here. This is kind of explaining one of the according to research, why even experienced or people get taken out. And what we want to do, though, to overcome this is replace these actions, these automatic impulsive responses when we get into areas like avalanche terrain, impulsive responses which are irrational in decision making, and replace them with these types of key points, and that we've gone over now and you've seen a number of times. And checklists and frameworks like this don't work all by themselves. You need a team of like-minded people who can act as co-pilots. That's why in the aviation industry, you have a co-pilot who's junior, not as experienced as the captain, but as a mate of mine who's an ex-fighter pilot who's come on and done some webinars with me before in the past. He said, when I started flying commercial flights, the much more senior captain said to me, your job is to follow my orders, except for when I'm doing something wrong. Your job is to correct me and tell me I'm doing something wrong and keep me from doing something wrong. So you need to have co-pilots, people speaking to each other. And that's what I encourage you really to choose the people that you ski with or ride with, snowboard with. And also on the professional front, it's got to be an open communication with the professional that you're skiing with or snowboarding with. And because none of us are perfect, and we all make errors, and there's times where we just are not consciously aware of some pretty obvious things.
So here, one last final time, the framework that really pulls everything together. Here in this image, you can see a couple notes that I've added into the framework, but this is just one last time to pull together the various different points, the safety points, the points that, if applied, can be the difference between making a day out, off-piste, ski touring very, very safe, make the difference between it being very, very safe, and if these points are not applied, making it very dangerous. And one last look at the overview of the talk that we just looked at, the Essentials talk, where we started out with looking at the problem, the problem of secured, knowing where the secured areas end and the unsecured areas begin. 9 out of 10 times it's the victim that triggers the avalanche, and it's a slab avalanche that's involved, usually cold, dry snow slab avalanche. And most of the time you only have about 15 minutes to live if you're taken and buried underneath the snow. That part of the problem, with the more complex part of the problem, the human factors, most of the time nothing happens. And when something happens, when an accident happens, often we're baffled because we think and we know that they should have known better. And the thing is that they did know better. They just weren't applying their experience and knowledge at that particular time. And then we moved into the solution of the idea of having a framework, and being able to not only have a framework as a checklist, but also have knowing about these human factors that will make us complacent about applying the framework. And so how do we overcome that is with teamwork. We're all a group of co-pilots, and we help each other to apply the essential prevention points. So I hope you all enjoyed this version of the Henry's Avalanche Talk Essentials. And if you have any questions, comments, then please don't hesitate to send me a message either via my website, henrysavalanchetalk.com. You can get to that just by putting in Henry and Avalanche into a Google search. Otherwise, keep in touch on my Instagram, Henry Off-Piste. And we're also on Facebook, on Henry's Avalanche Talk, on Facebook as well. Otherwise, for many of you, I'm going to see you in the stores in London, Manchester, and Glasgow, Braehead. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. And for those of you who I might not be seeing in person in the various different stores, definitely keep in touch. Have a great season, and hopefully see you on henrysavalanchetalk.com, where safety is freedom.
Oh. Nice and slow.
Woo. Light my